Hello, students. So, today we are going to start with the topic of the broader meaning of democracy. In this chapter, we have considered the meaning of democracy in a limited and descriptive sense. We have understood democracy as a form of the government. This way of defining democracy helps us to identify a clear set of minimal features that a democracy must have. So we have discussed about the basic features that democracy must have. What are the basic criteria that a government or a form of government should have to call it to be a democratic government. The most common form that a democracy takes in our times is that of a representative democracy. You have already read about this in the previous classes. In the countries we call democracy, all the people do not rule. A majority is allowed to take decisions on behalf of the all the people. Even the majority does not rule directly. The majority of the people rule through their elected representatives. This would become necessary because modern democracies involve such a large number of people that it is physically impossible for them to sit together and take a collective decisions. Like for example, for a country like India, it is very difficult for such a huge population to sit together and decide on something. So what they do is the modern form of democracy is where they elect people, or the representatives of the people are elected, and they take a decisions on their behalf. Even if the citizens does not have time, the desire of the skills to take part in all these decisions. So the people, even all those set of people, all the entire population don't have the enough skill set to take such a decision. There will never be a unanimous decision. This gives us a clear but minimal understanding of democracy. This clarity helps us to distinguish democracies from non-democracies, but it does not allow us to distinguish between a democracy and a good democracy. So these all features helps us to differentiate between a democracy and a non-democracy, but it does not help us to differentiate between a good democracy and a bad democracy. It does not allow us to see the operation of the democracy beyond government. For this, we would need to turn to a broader meaning of democracy. Sometimes we use democracy for organizations other than government. Just read this statements. We are a very democratic family. Whenever a decision has to be taken, we all sit down and arrive in a consensus, and my opinion matters as much as my father's. So apart from using the word democracy in government, we can use it in different setups also. We can use in the form of an organization, we can use in form of a group, we can use in form of a family also. Like this statement: I don't like teachers who do not allow students to speak and ask questions in the class. I would like to have a teacher with democratic temperament. One leader and his family members decide everything in his party. How can they talk of democracy? These way of using the word democracy go back to its basic sense of a method of taking decisions. A democratic decision involves consultation with and consent of all those who are affected by that decision. Those who say are not powerful have the same say in taking the decision as those who are powerful. This can apply to the government or a family or any other organization. Thus, democracy is also a principle that can be applied to any sphere of a life. So, democracy is term can not only be used only in form of government, but it can be used in regular day-to-day life in different spheres of a life. Sometimes you use the term democracy not to describe any existing government, but to set up an ideal standard that all democracies must aim to achieve. True democracy will come to this country only when no one goes hungry to bed. In a democracy, every citizen must be able to play equal role in decision making. For this, you don't need just an equal right to vote. Every citizen needs to have equal information, basic education, equal resources, and a lot of commitment. If we take this ideals seriously, then no country in the world is a democracy. Yet an understanding of the democracy is an ideal reminds us of why we value democracy. It enables us to judge an existing democracy and identify its weaknesses. It helps us to distinguish between a minimal democracy and a good democracy. In this book, we do not deal much with the extended notion of democracy. Our focus here is with some core fundamental features of democracy as a form of government. So we have discussed that how Democracy as a term or as a principle can be followed at different spheres of the life. And what are the different norms of a democracy as per individual to individual? Some says that India, a country will attain democracy, complete democracy, when no one goes hungry to bed. So at this stage, we just need to note that democracy can apply to many spheres of the life, and that democracy can take many forms. There can be various ways of taking decisions in a democratic manner, as long as the basic principle of consultation on an equal basis is accepted. The common form of democracy in today's world is rule through people's elected representatives. We shall read about this in chapter 3. But if the community is small, there are other ways to taking democratic decisions. All the people can sit together and take decisions directly. This is how Gram Sabha should work in the village. Can you think of any other democratic ways of decision making? This also means that no country is perfect democracy. The features of democracy that we discussed in this chapter provide only the minimum conditions of a democracy. That does not make it an ideal democracy. Every democracy has to try to realize the ideals of a democratic decision making. This cannot be achieved once and for all. This requires a constant effort to save and strengthen democratic forms of decision making. So there is no country has till now achieved, we cannot say that any country has achieved a complete democracy. There are various aspects of democracy that some countries have expertised or excelled on, but they have not excelled on different every aspect of the democracy. So that cannot be achieved once and for all. This requires a constant work. What we do as citizens can make a difference to making our country more or less democratic. This is the strength and the weakness of the democracy. The fate of the country depends not just on what the rulers do, but mainly on what we as citizens do. This is what distinguished democracy from other governments. Other forms of governments like monarchy, dictatorship, or one-party rule do not require all the citizens to take part in politics. In fact, most non-democratic governments would like citizens not to take part in politics. But democracy depends on active political participation by all the citizens. This is why a study of democracy must focus on democratic politics. Okay, so this was about this chapter, Why Democracy. So in the next class, we'll start with the next topic.